So Supertansky's basically just going on about the BBC. I've actually sent a couple of complaints into them recently. I do send complaints into them, or even just to make a point or comment. I don't know if she bothers actually contacting them, but I think she probably does because she's quite well spoken out. But this is the thing with the BBC. Actually, for once, I actually thought this was quite a good video from Supertansky, because I actually agree with what she's saying. So I don't usually agree with her on a lot of things, but she's right about the BBC. I think what I think the problem is, right, is that so the BBC is meant to be owned by the taxpayers, really. It's supposed to be like public service broadcasting, and I think Supertansky was kind of like making that point as well. Like, it's meant to be free from commercial influence and adverts, and it's meant to be like by the taxpayers. I don't think there's anything wrong with the license fee at all if they're doing what the people want. But this is the thing. When they've got all these slogans and sayings, like some of the Netflix and all these type of things have got this on demand, they're trying to make out that like we're demanding all the things that they're putting on there, but I don't think that's the case, right? Maybe football fans demand a match, but until you start a football club, there isn't, there aren't any fans, right? It's usually the people who want to start something, a club or something, and want to try get people to watch it. So no one actually demands it. They're trying to make out that the public is some kind of mob who are stamping their feet and saying entertainers, right? Through history, like Shakespeare and these other people, playwrights, have always been the ones who wanted to, they wanted to get up on the stage and they wanted an audience to come and watch them and listen to them, right? It's not like the Speaker in Parliament, when they grab him and putting him in the chair, right? It's like, it's the other way around. People usually want attention, and they usually get a crowd gathering around them. And when they've got this on demand, they're trying to make it out look like they're giving us what we want or what we're asking for, right? So I think there's some misleading around that. Now, this is the thing with the BBC, right? It's meant to be there to inform, educate and entertain. It's definitely not educating us about the important things we need to know at the moment, like rights and law and things like that. It's actually quite a very, very, very serious situation. It's a very, very, very serious situation at the moment in the country, and therefore the interests of the public is the law and our rights. So the BBC is not usually meant to get involved in politics unless it's covering an election, but if there's a big problem and issue at large around the country, right, then they're supposed to inform and educate the public as well, and they're actually not doing, because exactly like what Supertansky says, it's being controlled by political forces and interests which don't want us to know the truth and law. Like with the Petitions Committee in Parliament, when we're being blocked and obstructed illegally, and the BBC are not acting independently and using their legal team and lawyers, Panorama did something. Panorama did an investigation into the Met Police, and 8 officers got called out, right? That was about, as useful as they can be at the moment. Well, it's about as useful as they get. They should be, that should be the absolute minimum, right? That action with those 8 Met officers through Panorama, that should be like the minimum setting, right? And it's like that's on setting like 0.5, right? Or even 0.25. That knob that controls that amount of stuff should be on full at 10, or even BBC have an extra setting on 11, but it's nowhere near, right? And that is outrageous and scandalous, mainly because telling the truth can result in the main parties being in big trouble. And if the big main parties are somehow in control of the BBC or having a say in it, then they're definitely not going to want to sacrifice their own party and members. Therefore, the BBC cannot act impartially at the moment. As long as there are people involved in the BBC from the main parties, it cannot possibly act impartially, right? But I would say that to describe it in an even more accurate and better way, this whole thing with executives, right? The BBC used to have the board, and the BBC used to have board members, right? Some of the House of Lords. Now, they've got an executive, chief executive. Now, this is the thing, right? All these executives who are executing functions and executing directives, executing orders, right? It's all wrong. It's completely and utterly wrong. Executives, right? Look, right? When you have... when we've got the assizes and the courts, we've got a jury, right? And when you've got a local council corporation, you may have the councillors who are elected, right? But they're meant to answer to the people. But when you start getting these people called executives, right, you've adopted a business model which is based on corporate companies and entities who are for profit, and they either are the owners or they're being told what to do by owners. You do have these boards and chairmen on businesses, but then you've got these shareholders and AGMs and stuff like that. Now, the problem is that these executive functions on the council, through the agencies, all through the whole of government now, advertising standards, you name it, any department of the government or even non-departmental government agency, right? They've all over the last 10, 20 years effectively become private corporate entities that are still funded by the public, but they're operating as if they are a private corporate entity under... We didn't vote for the policy. The public didn't design the policy, right? And they've got all these rules and procedures. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. You have to submit this, you have to submit that. They're telling us what we can and can't do, even when we're submitting complaints, right? But they're meant to be put in place and answering to Parliament, but we're meant to be directing Parliament, but they're not. And what's happened is the main political parties are behaving like they own the government, but they don't own the government, right? It's meant to be His Majesty's government, but the Commons is meant to be the lawmaker and the rule maker now, overseen by the Lords, not private corporate people. Now, we need to get rid of executives, right? We need to scrap them. Now, the worst executive that I've encountered is the guy who's also the clerk, you see, the London Corporation Company, right? The Corporation of the City of London is a great model because it's kind of like you've got the Lord Mayor of London, then he's got the Lord Mayor with his alderman, which is a court. They've got judicial authority and powers. Then they can have all the full council in, right? The Court of Common Council, which is like a little bit like Parliament assembled or your local council assembled. It's with all the councillors who are elected to represent the people, right? But they are meant to do what the people tell them on a majority of each area, right? So, and the Lord Mayor in the court is meant to be a convener for legal proceedings, and really is supposed to have a jury, which is chosen from the people, so the people are meant to decide. But they've scrapped that in civil cases and got it down to judges, people, right? Now, the person who's named and called the executive on the London Corporation, he's actually the clerk, right? He's actually the clerk of the City of London Corporation. He executes everything. Like, he does everything. I put a petition in and they snubbed me off with it, right? Which was very important. And actually, I had a legal right to lay that petition under standing orders and get some action on it. And it was all actually correct, my claim, but they haven't. They haven't actually made an order to prove the rights. Now, the thing is that if the executive person who is actually directing and controlling what happens, if it's a clerk, seems quite peculiar to me, because like the clerk is only an advisor, right? Maybe a little bit like a legal advisor, but also basically deals with the things letters get sent in, and people apply for things and do things. So how can the clerk's a clerk, right? In a court, you've got the court manager, right? That's more like the executive, not the clerk. The clerk isn't the court manager. The court manager is the court manager, not the clerk, right? Now, in Parliament, you've got, Simon Burton as the clerk of the Parliament, but the MPs vote on things and make decisions, and the Speaker makes orders, right? And there are many different clerks for different things. But when Erskine May writes his book, for example, it's the book that MPs use for proceedings and procedures in Parliament, but it isn't the standing orders of Parliament, and it isn't actually the law itself. It's only the clerk's opinion and advice on what the law is, or is meant to be. The actual law is only the standing orders, right? Or the manual of procedure. The standing orders can be suspended, right? But we're meant to tell MPs are supposed to put their hand up in Parliament, vote and speak on what the majority of any of the people is at any time, if you've got that majority in writing. So if you're talking about executing a function, like, pushing a button and in an order being executive order, the public really are meant to be in charge, but they're making all these rules up to obstruct and block us now and make it very hard to get complaints through. And those people who are voted in aren't really representing us, they're representing the main parties. So the main parties are like the MPs. When we get things on paper and when you add it up in numbers, you take possession out of those MPs. There's no doubt about it. The political parties cannot have possession over the MPs when we set something in writing. If every citizen casts their opinion, their vote, and executes their rights, they have possession of the MP. Even if they stood for Labour, right? The Labour Party and the Tory can't have control when it comes down to the crunch, when it comes to the ultimate challenge and decision, and everyone executes their powers and has their say and is bothered to say something or is bothered to vote, right? Those political parties are not actually anything. They don't actually exist, right? Because whether it's Ed Miliband or Keir Starmer or anything, if the public want to, they can grab hold of their MPs, literally, metaphorically or whatever, in the same manner that you grab hold of Lindsay Oil, right? David Davis, right? And Cat Smith grabbed hold of Lindsay Oil and they ragged him into the chair, right? This is symbolic, right? David Davis MP and Cat Smith grabbed hold of Lindsay Oil and get into that chair, right? Because they voted of all the MPs for the Speaker and they put him on the chair. Now that is on demand. I've just said, they've got these Netflix and blah, 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 Sky, on demand. That is a Speaker of Parliament on demand. The audience is listening, right? This is the audience grabbing an entertainer and putting him on the stage. Now, that's the true on demand, right? That is true on demand. Now, the MPs are all on demand from us, right? They stood, but we voted them in. Now, this is the thing. And I'm at a good point there to just note that this is why the BBC and the TV and that lot, it's not on demand. We didn't actually vote for any of those shows and choose the people to go on the stage, right? It's not really on demand. There isn't an on demand. The government or someone decided they were going to have a radio station or a TV station, or if a private station does it, and then you get people who really want to be entertainers and then they go apply for the job. They're not actually elected or voted on. This is the thing with the BBC. If we, the people, voted for what shows we want to see and hear and who we want on them, then we would have executive control over, what happens to the Doctor Who shows, or who's on the Doctor Who shows, or who's going to be the Doctor Who, or what, type of programmes they make. But they're not asking us. And even if they did, are enough people going to say? And then when only a small amount of people say, but yet, the result, like public consultation, governments don't like going with consultations when not many people turn out to vote, because then really, out of the people who do turn out to vote or have a say, it's quite a small number, and they don't think that they should have to do what, if only that proves that it can't really be that much on demand if not that many people have turned out, right, to say. Like on demand for a public consultation, that's why they don't go with what's said. But they love going with, if you turn out to vote them in, and, what happens if hardly anyone turned out and someone won an election on, 6 votes, then they're quite happy to go work on the council or work in Parliament on 6 votes, like Sarah Pochin won by 6 vote majority. They might even get 6 people turning out to vote, and only... What happens if only one person turned out to vote and they voted for Lindsay Oil, right? He wouldn't be complaining. He wouldn't be saying, "Oh, well, I'd have to go with that. I'm not going to stand because not that many people voted me in." These people would go in on whatever they can get, right? Because they want to get in, right? But this is the thing: once they're in, they don't want to do what the majority say or what the people are saying, and this is the thing. So, we need to scrap executives, because there shouldn't be an executive. Really, the executive should be a poll. It should be whatever the people want, a majority. In fact, I can't stand on Doctor Who. They've got that digital character in the unit building, that's kind of like AI, half human robot thing. I hate that. I don't like it. I really do not like that character. But that's really kind of like what the executive should be, after you've fed in everyone's opinion, or anyone who's got an opinion, and if they don't have an opinion, then, there can't be that much demand, surely. If there's very few people with opinion, there's a very low demand, and to say that it's on demand is misleading to make it be like, the show must go on. They had the Sylvester McCoy Doctor Who episode when they had that circus on that planet, and it was like there was some ancient monument or site, and there were these entertaining, these aliens who wanted to be entertained, and they manifested as like the audience in the circus, and they were making the circus perform for them, right? I don't think that, you see, when you've got the Colosseum, they built the Colosseum. If you build it, they will come. That's not on demand. On the basis of if you build it, they will come, someone actually said, "Oh, I'm going to build something," right? Someone wanted to build something They didn't demand it being built. Someone wanted to. Usually with show business and entertainment, it's usually someone who likes, wants to be, he wants a crowd. He like William Penn. William Penn started speaking in the street, in Gracechurch Street, and got a crowd around him. And he ended up getting into trouble, right? But that's the sort of, Shakespeare wanted to be a playwright. You got to get these people. It's not easy to organise plays. You got to have a writer. Someone's got to write it. It's usually a collaboration. So even if you had a crowd demanding entertainment, and this is the thing, the public can entertain themselves, right? Let's get this right. Taverns are public houses. The public go into a tavern and they have drinks and they socialise, so they're talking to each other. The crowd entertains each other on basic principle. When you're on a plane, sometimes you talk to people, if everyone's not paranoid about strangers, right? When you're on the bus, people talk to people. That's entertainment. In fact, I was looking into what the word entertainment meant for these elections. If you go into a travel lodge hotel and you haven't paid for a room, but it's raining and you went in there to get out of the rain and there's somewhere to sit and you sit on that chair and you're talking to the guests, you're being entertained for free of charge, unless they throw you out. You're managing to get yourself free entertainment, right? Conversation is actually, under the word entertainment, being entertained, right? Now, if you're in a pub, they're providing drink and meal and you're paying for it, right? That's food, right? Now, people might go into a tavern and ask for food, demand food. Now, if you can't speak to the bartender, you've got a problem, right? Because you can't order anything. So bartenders usually entertain the guests and have a bit of conversation, like Al Bundy, right? Al Bundy. But it's the food that's on demand and entertainment there. You can speak to someone, you can speak to people in the street or whatever, right? Now, when you get, if someone's in there and goes, if there's a woman there who's good at singing, they might say to her, go on then, get up and sing us a song. They might not ask, her to or demand her to, but the landlord, if it's Al Bundy or someone, might say, well, I'm going to put some entertainment on, or I want to, right? But if there isn't any entertainment on, then the people usually will talk amongst themselves, if they're allowed to speak, And then what is entertainment? Well, entertainment's jokes, banter, fun, laughing. Keir Starmer wants to ban banter and joke making in restaurants because apparently it offends people, They don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear people's conversations or what they've been up to. They want people to keep out of the business. They don't. So it's like it's on demand. It's the opposite. They demand that it's Keir Starmer in a restaurant now wants to demand that you don't entertain him, that you don't crack any jokes, that you don't say this or that. Particularly if you're a very unpopular MP, right? People usually can entertain themselves, right? And when it comes to these massive O2 stadiums and arenas, I've never been a fan of those huge festivals where it's all that far away and it's just like, it's that far away that you have to get it on a massive big screen. You can't really see what's going on the stage. I've always preferred small gigs in more intimate, in more intimate surroundings, with smaller gigs where it's more personal, right? And I've never demanded it. You get what there is. Some of these bands prefer to fill up gigs because they get more money out of it, and then you have to play once. It's if they usually want to go around more venues and play smaller gigs, if they like doing that, if they want to, right? It's up to them. And most people who are in a band want to form a band. They're like, I want to be a musician. I would like it if people wanted to hear me or liked to hear me, right? But you're the one who starts it in the first place, right? So this whole on-demand business is misleading. The problem with the BBC and all these Netflix and TV shows now is they're just churning out rubbish because they're getting far too much money for what they're doing. They're making a fortune, and they've got all this extravagant money to spend on opulent, extravagant sets and make all these things that no one could possibly ever afford in their own lives. So they just watch it on TV, like fantasy, all these costumes and outfits and, all these wonderful sets. But it's also having an effect on people's expectations, and also then making them sad if their life doesn't live up to that expectation, because all these really elaborate and opulent, expensive sets have really overshot the mark of the status quo, right? And then this is when you get Donald Trump, and it's like, well, we'll make America great and everyone can have this. So he's actually already trying to salesman that, we milked you all. We made these like studios and sets which, can only possibly have a small number of people, actors or whatever. And then they make all this opulent lifestyle, but they're living the lifestyle, right? That's the thing. These actors and TV shows, that's their life. But then, because you're up in the ante, you're raising the bar, then it makes everyone else depressed. Now, they're churning out more and more, they're milking us more and more and more to make more and more shows, and more people can be stars, and more people can make more shows and churn out more rubbish and entertainment. But this is the thing, it isn't really entertaining because you're getting this proportion of people where that actually becomes their life. And this is then when BBC are like, oh, well, we'll invite you in and, you can meet the stars and, we'll let you have a little taste of it yourself to make up for it, right? Or to give you some excitement. Notice that they're having to, it's all about, at the end of the day, it's like it's like the entertainment box, isn't it, right? It's like, what can you get out of it? It's like, let's get Russell T Davies on. I'm not knocking Russell T Davies, but let's get Russell T Davies on, or Stephen Moffat, and let's see what let's see what we can squeeze out of them like a sponge. Let's see what entertainment we can get out of them. Let's see how much excitement they can give the guests, or let's see how much fun they can give them. For X amount of time, right? And they're always trying to get, but what's Doctor Who, for example. I'm going to use this example because, they used to have different guests on, and more people got a chance to have a go at the show or film it or write a script for it, right? And that's what built it. That's what built the whole thing up. But now it's like they don't want other people messing with it or meddling with it. They don't want different people being in control of it. And that's like it's almost like why they don't want the voters voting what the BBC should be. They've got these executives, and like Supetansky says, they've got the Conservatives or the Labour, have got a stronghold on the BBC. They don't really want to tell us the truth about the law and our rights, which is why we're in the massive mess now, why the public haven't got control of the government. And then they put these persons who are meant to be, repair must not be undertaken by idiots or whatever, so they say we'll have to get professional in. It has to be Moffat, or it has to be, Russell T Davies, because, but then they're giving them control of the whole series, and they are almost like an executive, but it actually wasn't created like that. It was actually, the whole franchise was built up by different people over time, but then you end up, they just want to have certain control over it. The government was built up by many different MPs, by many different parties over time. There's always been prominent parties, but there hasn't even always been parties. And now you've got these, it has to be the Tories or it has to be the Labour who are in this executive control sort of position of the government, and then they're obsessing over, we can't let the public, it's like, we can't have the public decide what happens to doing Doctor Who. It has to be Russell T Davies or Stephen Moffat, right? That's like the government. We have to have Labour or the Tories, putting legislation through. We can't have the public deciding. That would be like, all the people in the local area deciding, what their MP votes on, right? But isn't that meant to be what the MP does? right? But because they won a Labour seat, they think that they're running on the false notion that people who voted them in, right, are going to want to do every single thing that this other entity wants, and that people don't have the people who didn't have a say in certain things. Look, right, if you do not vote in an election, it doesn't mean that you don't have a right when there is something that arises that you do have a say in. And this is what the political parties don't like, right? That you're not voting for a member of parliament who only represents his voters who voted him in, and then none of the other voters actually have any rights. It's like saying the winning party, only those members of the public who turned out to vote have got a right or say in government. They might not have voted because there weren't any candidates who they thought should be in Parliament, right? There weren't any people. At the end of the day, you want an MP who purely... You don't want an MP who stands for a party, because if he stands for a party, he's not standing for the people, he's standing for the party, which is ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. You want one of these type of people who's like really enthusiastic, full of absolute pure enthusiasm, but he doesn't have any of his own opinions at all, and he doesn't stand for a party. But he's super enthusiastic to go in and speak, right? That's kind of what you want. And it's a little bit like Corbyn's sort of coming across like that now, whether I believe him or not, but that's how Corbyn is sort of presenting himself now for his party's new Your Party thing, right? And that's what it's meant to be, you know? That's what it's actually meant to be. You see, Lindsay Hoyle was supposed to get an award because he served his constituents supposedly outstanding service. But I'd like to see if that service was from surgery with primarily Labour voters, and if it was, you know, if he won the election on Labour, and then you've got very keen and enthusiastic Labour Party members who all turned out to vote, and if he got his award from Labour, it's like, he's going to be doing what the Labour Party want anyway on the manifesto. So it doesn't matter whether he was outstanding in surgery or not, because really the Labour Party people don't need a surgery. Because if an MP stands for a party and wins, and they're going to do what that party wants on the manifesto, then the Labour people are the people who least need a surgery, because they won the election, and they don't really need surgery, because they're relying on him to just do what the party said. So I can't see how you would get an award for outstanding service for Labour if you're just going to go do the Labour manifesto, because they don't really need to go in for surgery. So I'd like to know exactly what the things that he did in order to... Now, if his electors all wrote in, and the Labour Party people who voted him in, and they went into surgery with him, and they said, they all wrote really good praise of when he was in surgery, and that's what got him it. But if they're his supporters anyway and they voted him in, and they're keen Labour fans, then it's almost kind of like not only did Labour vote him in, but then Labour got him knighted as well. This is the thing. Was he doing outstanding service to people that didn't get what they wanted by default anyway if they hadn't gone in, on the back of the Labour manifesto. This is the thing. Was he doing outstanding service to people who didn't vote for Labour? This is the thing. I'd like to see. I'm not saying whether he did or didn't, but it's probably written down somewhere exactly what he did do or who did recommend it and who he didn't see. Many people can't get to see an MP at the moment. The time when I was booked in to see an MP, and it could have gone well, was when they locked everyone down on the pandemic, and they blocked me from seeing him. Right, they shut all the government and offices down. So it's almost kind of like they timed it on purpose. I wasn't permitted or able to see my MP because they didn't want me to go in and say what I had to say to him, which is what the BBC are doing with our rights now. You can't get the information out there. You can't teach people the right information. And now, with this whole situation in the country where everyone's talking but no one's listening hardly, everyone wants to there are people who really haven't actually got that much to add or that much to say, and there are people who, like Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage and people like that, who just want people to, they want to be the speaker, and they want to tell people what we should be doing, right? But even those people, they're the ones who want to be speaking and want people to be listening to them, but they still haven't got the correct things to say. They're still not going to be saying the right things or the true things. They're just saying the things that they want to say and that they think that people should do this or that. We're not getting the truth out. And there's there are only two factors in it. Firstly, if people are wrong and they don't know. And secondly, if they're trying to evade or stop the truth from getting out. And that's what I think the case is, because then the Labour Party and Conservatives are in big trouble, as is the government, when the truth gets out. So, and that's when you get into all these constitutional rights and laws, which are meant to safeguard when these MPs are acting unlawfully or trying to block us, which is why we're meant to have rights, but we're not getting the rights. They're blocking e-petitions, They've got an Attorney General in who's not meant to be a member of the House of Lords. They created the Senedd, which is a new privileges when they're not meant to do that. That's big, and then, but the majority of people kind of would like to get back to normal life, but then we're being forced into this kind of I'm a celebrity, get me out of here type thing, where we're all having to step up to the podium at the exact time when the government wanted us all to start creating digital ID and getting in front of the camera and knowing all his opinions, not so the opinions get heard, but so they could assess us, sort us all out, and make sure that we didn't get heard, right? So they could sort us all through after they've already broke the European Convention of Human Rights and duped us, allowed YouTube to come into the country unlawfully and demand a illegal policy through all of England and Europe, which gives up our rights to private corporate strange entities, when it's illegal in this European Union. It's not illegal in America because they don't have it. It's illegal here. When they started off with the platforms, they didn't have it, but they've developed it. Once they got us on there, it's entrapment. We've been entrapped to give up our private personal details against the European Convention of Human Rights. And they used Big Brother Watch immediately, straight away, as soon as they made that law. They were straight on the TV with the Big Brother Watch saying, give up the they threw the idea of privacy in your own house, cast it straight to the wind, and immediately did opposite. And because that was put out on mainstream TV, and they wanted it to get into everyone's brain and mind, and because I know the BBC actually, made Mark Zuckerberg a billionaire in England and told everyone to create a digital ID. That's Tony Blair. So he never intended those Human Rights Act articles. I don't even know why they made them in the first place, because they made them to see if they could have these principles and laws, and if they could get things past our vision, Eurovision, if they could, as a test, the European Convention of Human Rights is a test, like the Crown Prosecution Service have a test, right? Or barristers or lawyers have a test. It's a test to see how dumb we are, right? How dumb and stupid we are. So they make all these things which like, they want the China government, right? And you can't have any of those European Convention of Human Rights articles if you've got a China government, because the China government goes absolutely against every single one of those fucking principles, right? And it's a test. And they've been testing us the whole time. Since they made it, like now they've been putting all these, right for life violations through, and actually setting us against each other. Because the thing with the European Convention of Human Rights is, you can't have, if you have freedom of expression, you have to have it absolute pure freedom of expression. But how they're doing it is they're doing it so, like, everyone's violating against everyone else, and no one's got any rights, because they're saying that, every single individual has a right not to be offended effectively by another person, which means that the other person hasn't got any rights at all if you're offended all the time. That's how they're doing it. And therefore they want us to be in conflict, because we're all trying to protect our own rights, because everyone else is offending us all the time. And that means that it can be debated and argued and messed around with the whole time. And that's why these judges are making these stupid decisions on it. But it says it's an ultimatum. It's like, you got freedom. It says you got absolute freedom of expression, but we haven't, or speech. So it's kind of a lie, because you wouldn't need all these court cases if it was absolute. It would be like statutory power. And in a way, they really don't. They don't like the Bill of Rights, right to petition, because that is like, absolute. Like, all prosecutions are illegal, but they're not upholding it like that way. But only if you're doing petition cases, not when you're not engaging in, pursuing, getting things sorted out through Parliament. But those European Convention of Human Rights are meant to be just in normal daily life for everything, not doing parliamentary things, right? They didn't want those rights. It's a test. It's one of their tests, because that's why they did the Big Brother watch straight away, and why the BBC did Facebook digital ID, and it's why the government are going against all those rights. Like that Kim Leadbeater, Kim Leadbeater cannot believe in Convention of Human Rights, or she just can't understand it, or she's like, the way it's set up is kind of like, she thinks that rather than everyone else is free to say what they want and you understand them, she's like, no, they're not. Because, like, anything you can say at any time, she's like, the only law is that if I'm offended by you or anything you do, then I can prosecute you, right? Which means that no one can really has a right to say anything. It's like it's purely subjective, on a person at any time, what's legal depending on if you like it or not. That's like thumbs up, thumbs down. That's like social media law. That's like or don't like. That's like, I can block you or ban you for any reason or no reason. So Kim Leadbeater believes in any reason or no reason law, which is like her law, Kim's law, right? In Kim's law, if anything upsets Kim or distresses her, she can prosecute you and it's illegal, right? Which means that the law is Kim's law, right? Whatever Kim likes or doesn't like is the law, right? And she prosecute you for it, right? Which means that there isn't an actual written law. It's just Kim's law, right? What upsets Kim or doesn't upset Kim, whether someone, wants to end their life or doesn't end their life, whether someone wants abortion or not. So these people believe in, they're like little kings. They believe in, they're the ruler and king, and they can make up law on the spot, which is a little bit like how the king used to do the court of Royal Commission or the Star Chamber, right? So, and this is why we had the right to petition to protect us from the king saying that I don't like you doing this or I don't like you doing that, just because for any reason or no reason, because I'm the king, right? The king, right, would have any reason or no reason, right? I'm the fucking king, right? I don't give a fuck what the law is. I don't like that, and I'm going to fuck you for it, right? Even when people were bringing petitions of grievance through the observation of due process of law was a legitimate claim. Someone said, we want to get this religion changed or adjusted, and then they legitimately put a claim through, and the king said, no, I don't like you doing that. I'm going to fuck you all. And, he executed people or, cut their ears off or whatever. That's a Star Chamber. That arises out of nowhere. Kim Leadbeater wants to be the queen, right, with the Star Chamber. It's Kim's Star Chamber. It's Kim's law, right? Kim's law and Kim's people, disabled people, we all want to die. Even if they want to, the Star Chamber, we want to self-implode. That's what we feel like in the mood today. Today is a good day to die, right? We all think we've got the right to die today, so we all want to fucking implode, explode, whatever. That's like Star Chamber. That's like the King's Law, right? We're kings, right? Just because we want to. So that's any reason or no reason. You don't need to get the law made or changed for that. Now that's sort of how they're wanting to do these articles. But what they're doing is, they're that vague that you can go in and argue that. And as long as you can get a judge to agree with you, then you win. But then someone else can go into the court under those human rights and then argue the opposite and then have a judge decide something else, right? So you don't end up with legislation because it's just so vague, the articles, that it's whatever, there isn't a law. It's whatever the judge decides. So the judge is getting executive powers of like a jury, and there isn't really, and you don't end up with any written law. You just end up with whatever you can get the judge to agree with, and that's like Starmer. Starmer goes in with these complicated legal arguments based on human rights, which is all meant to be all in written form, and puts a strong argument across for something, and he persuades the judge to make a decision in his favour. So it's like whatever your argument is. So that's based on reason. So that's like, if it's reasonable or not, well, I know that civil law is based on the probability, not on reasonable doubt, but it's reasonable. So you see, these human rights are reasonable, but it's, why don't you reason? This is the thing. If citizens didn't have any law and they went through life through, reasoning, right, then when people have a dispute or argument or behavioural issue, then you talk to each other and reason it out and you explain yourself, right, to try to understand it. That's what we call altruism and cooperation and understanding. So you can understand why people are behaving a certain way. Education and learning about it rather than just wanting to fuck them with the law or punish them. That's like a revenge principle or whatever, right? This is the thing. But, they made, when they sold the pitch for the human rights was like, they pitched it to everyone as like absolute, right? The big sell of it, to join up to it and to get it made in law, the big sell was like, this is an absolute right, everyone has the absolute right of freedom of expression, or everyone has the absolute right of freedom of speech. But it turns out that we don't. And then they're putting all these laws through that you can't say this, you can't say that, or this or that, right? And, there's a lot of people with different nationalities and religions which you invite in trouble Because, like, you've got these people under these Islamic or Muslim laws, and now they're going around saying, telling people not to walk the dogs, right? Because it's against that religion, and they've got a right to uphold that religion for the whole country. Maybe it was a bad idea, therefore, to mix all these religions together too much or encourage it other than just, people coming on holiday here or having an extremely small minority. But Charles wants to invite them all in and, build the religious centres everywhere. When the religions are not compatible, that's not a good idea. And that's what that, Tim's on about on that Fast Jet Performance channel, But Charles seems to think they are compatible, but, apparently they're not. If Charles thinks they're compatible and is, wanting to, tie the knot, so to say, and, get everyone get on together, they can't, because you've got these religions, saying that, trying to tell people, what they can and can't do in their own country with normal, domestic, daily life, right? So, now the only reason you can get rid of that is if you break down those religions. So Charles clearly is either planning to eventually dilute and scrap religions. Now, is he openly saying that to the Muslims? Is he saying, I'm going to dilute and scrap your religion? Is he saying that to Islams? Is he saying it to Christians? Well, either he is or he isn't, because it doesn't seem like it's possible for them to be compatible. And then you've got all these prayers outside abortion clinics as well, they're scrapping that. It can't work. So what he's trying to do is make something to work which can't work, because its function, they can't work together. He wants to try and make it so it does, you've got to change them. So you're changing what it is. So you don't have a right to practice a religion when someone's attempting to dilute it down and change it. So there's some deception going on there in that, right? But the thing behind all this religion and all this ethnic issue is business. Look, right, Tony Blair and these MPs, they went out into the world. They've done all these business deals. They've got China under the social point system. They've done loads of, businesses. They've done government models. They've got, Dubai, Beijing, blah, blah, blah. They've got them all, suited up in business suits, handshakes, executives. This is great. Under the business model, they love it. They're like, we get on really well with these countries under a business model. I'm the boss. I own the business, you work for me, I'm the executive, you do what I say, right? That is not a democratic model, but it works for them because they can boss people around and tell them what to do and organise it. Hey, look, we've organised India, right? We've got all these offices and businesses in India, right? And they're all doing what we say. This is great. Everyone should live like this, but it's an executive business model, right? And actually, the religion is actually, the business model is, it's in a country where there's that religion. Now, this is the thing. We don't have, this is not a country of that religion. They're wanting the business models of England and all these other countries to work like clockwork, right? And magically not have the different religious issues. You got to get rid of religion, but they're lying about it. They're bullshitting it. They're saying everyone's got the freedom to practice their religion, but they're acting these laws to scrap it, which is why I know that Human Rights Act 1998 is a test to see if they can scrap all the religions and make the whole world into the Starship Enterprise, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, business model with executive functions under administrative law, like they've now got the Advertising Standards Authority, the Electoral Commission, the Ofcom, all these things. But you see, they're non-departmental government agencies, but they've got them operating like they've got, Beijing, Taiwan, whatever, Dubai, all operating under business executive models, and all these people obey commands regardless of what their religions are and blah, 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 right? But in social life, they're not under executive orders. So now you've got these people going, oh, you're not allowed to walk your dogs because it's against our religion and so forth. And Charles is like, don't worry, when we're finished, everyone will be like, social media governance will be, everyone's social life will be like under a work ethic, which is what they're trying to do with Mark Zuckerberg and Google, right? And also spying all our information. But yet we're meant to have a right to privacy in Europe. But they've coerced us out of it. The European Convention of Human Rights is the biggest con that has ever, the biggest double-blind experiment that has ever been pulled on mankind. It's Tony Blair's hat trick. It's like Tony Blair's big blag. It's the biggest Tony Blair con of mankind that you could ever possibly pull out of your pocket, right? And he's a flaming liar, right? It's treason. It's colluded with Facebook, YouTube, the whole lot, right? Tony Blair, and even Ben Habib has said this, right? Tony Blair is Satan. Tony Blair is the devil incarnation. He actually is Satan, right? If there was any definition of it, right, of evil ministers not in the Bible, this is not in fucking religious, right? This is like the law of the Constitution of England, right? Evil ministers, right? Blair is a compulsive liar, right? Tony Blair is a compulsive, psychopathic maniac and liar. And these are the type of people who can, he's got minions, teams. He's in command of companies, businesses. No normal person could do that, right? And he's interested in money, profit, things, right? And he wants the whole world to be under this governance thing. In order to do it, he has to deceive people and lie. He's put Attorney Generals in during the members' House of Lords when you're not meant to do that. They created the Senate when you're not allowed to create any more privileges of Parliament. He's he came out of, Gray's Inn or Lincoln's Inn, right? He's an employment lawyer. He's the worst lawyer in the history of England. His law's shit. He completely blags people. He's a con man. And this is what con men do. Good con men are successful. They con people and they get away with it. And not only that, they make a lot of money out of it and they mislead people. Now that Human Rights Act 1998 is a con. It's the biggest con on Europe that mankind could ever possibly imagine, right? It's a con, and it's a test to test us, how thick we are, how stupid and dumb we are, right? And people have fallen for it. And these MPs have been doing everything against it. Since as soon as they made it, they've been getting the TV show to make everyone in their minds not even believe in privacy at home because they know their devices are listening on them and they want them to. And therefore, how can you have any privacy from private corporate strangers and entities? And they don't want you to have it from the government. All they want is you to not trust any of your... You see, they don't want you to trust anyone or have any friends. They don't want you to trust privacy with any other of your fellow human colleagues unless they're close friends, right? That's the devil. The devil doesn't want people to trust each other. And the devil doesn't want people to, have equal, wealth and fair wealth, right? But yet, he's getting us to trust strangers running YouTube, strangers running Facebook. And then, Mark Zuckerberg's like, oh, well, we'll just scrap all the staff like Elon Musk did, sack them all, and there's all be AI-generated computers. Even worse than a strange human is a strange robot, right? I mean, they're knocking these TV programs out about Daleks, Cybermen, whenever there's something bad happens in a movie, so is an army of robots that do it, and that's what Mark Zuckerberg wants with all our private information. They're even trying to make these robots intelligent, right? To assessors, surveyors, study our behaviour. Then they've got drones that can fly around now and attack people. They're having a laugh. They're having an absolute laugh. And they're squeezing us like sponges and milking it, and they're living the lives of absolute Dixie, right? These celebrities, these people on these TV shows, they're living the life above and beyond what anyone could expect in normal life. And they're trying to make out that, this is what we should all aspire to, but you can't do it. But, it's not too bad because, we milked all the money out of you to make a half an hour TV show. So then we'll make 10 TV shows about, the kids going in and getting a taste of the, they're even indoctrinating kids to want people to worship them, have fans, to make it okay. This is okay, right? The normal human state of walking around and interacting with your friends and going on holiday and doing all this thing is not to have millions of worshippers knowing who you are and what you're doing. There's no privacy in that. In fact, the idea of being a celebrity, that it's questionable if the idea of encouraging children to be Facebook celebrities is against the principles of human rights, the right to privacy. Why should any kid want to be worshipped like a god? They used to have Chinese emperors, being worshipped as fucking gods, and then they got rid of that because they thought it was weird, right? All these mums are going, let's put fences around the school because all our kids are now YouTube celebrities, so they're like little mini gods and they're going to be attracting strangers, right? That's not normal. And then they want police on the school gates, and then everyone, they don't know is a pervert or a weirdo, right? Why isn't the Calendar News or the BBC saying, it's abnormal to want your kid to be a celebrity, because then you're encouraging, that, it might attract loads of millions of fans who don't know who they are, and you might have to put fences around schools. How about, just have them as normal kids, This is a thing. But a lot of that is to do with immigration and the different attitudes of when you mix loads of foreign people together and they're all going to school, they've got different. It's a little bit like telling you can't walk your dog. Muslims and Islams are like, you can't. We don't want white people walking their dogs. Well, it's like we don't want white people we don't know hanging around outside schools, right? Or we don't want this is a thing, and we used to have freedoms in this country. Freedoms are gone at schools now because everyone's scared and paranoid. The only thing that's been generated and made since Tony Blair has got in is fear and loathing. It's like that film Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He's created a country of fear and loathing, right? And Charles thinks it's great because Charles cannot possibly believe that those religions are compatible, and that's why they're doing that fake Human Rights Act. He's actually scrapping it. Like, you can't pray outside abortion clinics. Now you can't walk your dogs near Muslims' houses. And then, where can you walk your fucking dog? What they're doing is they're using it to break down the religions and get rid of them because they don't want them. Their history. They want everything under what the government want is executive orders and policies that aren't voted for by the voters, but are conjured up by Tom, Dick and Harry, right? And that everyone has to obey them or consent, submit, accept, kneel. So we're going back to this kind of like ruler, but it's not, Charles is not the king now. The king is Sergey Brin. The king is Mark Zuckerberg. The king is Jeff Bezos, right? Kneel, submit, consent, accept. We've already given up. In Europe, where we've got the right to privacy, King Sergei and King Mark have already invaded us and got us to give up our rights in their kingdom, which is the kingdom of the internet, right? So in the kingdom of Mark and in the kingdom of Sergey Brin, you don't have any right to privacy because all these corporate strangers are you've got the right to be studied like a lab experiment and assessed, so how it might be better to manage you in the future and better control you, and how it might be better to bring the drones in and attack us if there's any trouble, so they can take us over like China. In fact, are they building an army in China now with drones? Is China building a drone army to attack us, And is Elon Musk, playing a role in that, This is the thing. And yet, Sir Ken McCallum says that this Crown Prosecution Service say that China isn't a threat. Well, is China a threat if we go to war with it? And, they've got all the personal private information of all the people who have to get signed up to the army, like the Russian army, get all the population signed up, and then program it into their fucking drones, from their TikTok accounts, all their private, family and personal plans and profiling and behaviour and all this other type of stuff once you start getting these AI programs going, which are advancing very, very, very quickly. This is the thing with the CPS. The CPS are like, speak to the anxious face ain't listening. The CPS are thick. They're like, these legal tests, right? If you've ever rung the CPS up on the telephone, right, they're thick as fuck. They're like, you got to be a fucking retard to get a job on the CPS. It's like for rejected lawyers and solicitors who can't get a fucking proper job, right? It's like a Remy job. They're thick. I don't know how they solve these murders. It's like, it's a miracle. In fact, a lot of them they don't solve, right? They're not solving a lot of the crimes, and they're highly politicised. And the problem with our constitutional law is that if you violate it, we're the victim. They're the offender. They don't want to confess either to their own offences and crimes. So we're being governed now by people who are obstructing democracy. And the television is not helping, The TV isn't helping. In fact, it's distracting us from these problems and getting them sorted out with these entertainment. And I don't think people are demanding it. I don't think people are demanding it at all. If you need football stadiums and matches to keep the population distracted, then there's something wrong. No one demands any entertainment. People can quite easily entertain themselves or each other, right? Because conversation with your fellow citizens is the original entertainment. In fact, people need to talk to each other more. But that's what the government don't want. The Labour and the Tory party don't like people talking to each other because then they form other parties or act independently, right? And don't do what the Tories and that's why they don't want us trusting each other. And they don't want us talking to each other, and they don't want us listening to, Rupert Lowe or Nigel Farage or whatever. So the executive needs to be scrapped, and we actually need a true democratic model. The BBC should be under a democratic model, and there needs to be something different from this horrible advertisement-based spam crap that YouTube's giving out. This endless advertising spam and the crap on TV, just rubbish. Materialistic indulgences, which aren't. They're not good for people. They did it with food and cooking. And they're still trying to justify it now, even though that we know that it's bad. I thought we'd sorted all that out now with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the Americans, and they were going to correct it all. But the problem with the food and the excess and the unhealthiness of the food is the same problem with the social material on TV as well, right? And cleaning up the food and the diet and the eating habits and the eating model for the country needs to also be the social thing is cleaning up, but they think they're doing it by block ban and block and ban and this kind of like authoritarian regime model. But it's actually not. It's making people not. It's actually making the social order worse, because it's actually making people just antisocial. And it's not helping people to understand each other. You help the social order and you help people to understand each other and educate each other. It's meant to educate people, but they're not getting educated.